Rodgers gets the snap. Blitz is on. Rodgers scrambles left, winds up Rainbow.
Cobb.
He's got Cobb at the 10 to the 5
Yes!
to the end zone. Touchdown and a dagger. Oh my goodness! An NFC North Division Championship dagger.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Real Packers Talk, the podcast dedicated to everything green and gold. I am your host, Ethan Peltier. You can find me anywhere on Instagram or Twitter at Real Packers Talk. Additionally, you can find me on YouTube and Spotify/Anchor. I'm here today to break down the Packers' first overall pick, their first round pick, 13th overall, which would be Lukas Van Ness, defensive end/edge rusher out of Iowa. And I briefly went over him when I broke down the prospects that we selected in yesterday's episode, but today I would like to go a little bit more in depth and focus specifically on this player. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. I'm going to go over some things that I really like about him, some things that I think he might need to work on. I'll briefly go over his RAS, which is Relative Athletic Score for those who don't know, and then wrap it all up and discuss what kind of role Lukas Van Ness can play in this Packers defense for this upcoming 2023 season. So, the Packers shocked the world, and when I say shocked the world, they shocked absolutely no one by not selecting a receiver in the first round. As I mentioned in yesterday's episode, drafting receivers and pass catchers is not the Packers' MO, and I don't know if it ever will be. I know that Jackson Smith-Njigba, the Ohio State receiver, was sitting there at 13, and there were a ton of mock drafts that were projecting him to go to Green Bay. But as hopeful as I was, because trust me, as I was watching the draft on Thursday night, and we're getting closer to the Packers pick, it's become pretty obvious that they're not going to trade up or trade down at this point. And I see that JSN is sitting right there, and I'm, kind of pounding the table. I'm like, let's get a receiver. Let's change the MO. Let's go do this. That didn't happen, and it doesn't surprise me. I did want to specifically mention that because I just scrolling through Packers Twitter and Packer Instagram, there are just a ton of people, Packers fans specifically, that are mad. Maybe not so much at the Lukas Van Ness pick, but more so they're mad that we didn't get Jackson Smith-Njigba. That was never going to happen. As hopeful as I was, I don't think that was ever going to happen. And I want to explain why the Packers went with Lukas Van Ness as opposed to a Jackson Smith-Njigba, which was a player that a lot of people, again, were projecting to go to Green Bay. I've listed a few reasons here. The number one reason is, first of all, we don't even know what the Packers, as far as their general office and their front office, what their draft board looks like. We don't know how they value these players. For all we know, Jackson Smith-Njigba might not even have been on their board in terms of we legitimately think we can get him and he'll fall to us in a spot. Like, clearly they did not have a super high first-round grade on him. Otherwise, they would have picked him. I think Green Bay has shown that over the past couple of years that they have put an emphasis in drafting and developing on the defensive side of the ball. Has it worked out? For some players, yes. Others, not so much. But they, like I said, have made an emphasis on wanting to bolster the defensive side of the ball. I'm all for it. A lot of people were upset when Rashawn Gary got picked 12th overall back in 2019, and look how he turned out. Same thing with Kenny Clark back in, I think, 2017, maybe 2016. The point is that there are always going to be players that Packers fans specifically maybe we haven't heard of them, or they're not big names, or they don't get a ton of traction. But for whatever reason, I feel like when it comes to our first-round picks, the Packers fans are always disappointed before we even give the guy a chance. So I'm not saying that Lukas Van Ness is going to turn into Rashawn Gary, but he definitely has the potential, which brings me to my next point. LVN has tremendous upside. He, as I've already mentioned, reminds me a lot of Rashawn Gary coming out of college, both athletic freaks of nature that can just power rush, and if you can develop them and kind of hone that skill set, you're talking about a playmaker on the defensive side of the ball. And I think the pairing of Gary and Lukas Van Ness is going to be fun to watch. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is Rashawn Gary is hurt right now. He tore his ACL last year, and he is not set to return by the beginning of this next season. You're going to want to have guys there who can rush the passer. I'm not saying that Lukas Van Ness is going to go out day one and just be a stud at pass rushing, but he's a nice little Band-Aid for the time being. You know, send him out there, get him some playing time while Gary's recovering, and then when Gary gets back, get him in a rotation, and that way he has a little bit of a playing experience. There aren't huge expectations, and now you can kind of ease him in now that he's now that you've got that little buffer. I think that this was a pick for the future. It wasn't a pick to address a team need right now. Now, not saying that edge rusher was not a team need, because it certainly was. The Packers were not great at rushing the passer last year. I don't have the stats on hand right now, but I guarantee you they were one of the bottom teams as far as pass rushing numbers went. They really wanted to address that. As I get through the rest of the prospects that we picked, I promise you will see a trend. The Packers definitely wanted to address the pass rush, and I think Lukas Van Ness is going to be phenomenal when it comes to that. The last point that I wanted to make is that Lukas Van Ness had to have been highly rated on their board. If you ask me, I had him as the third-ranked defensive end/edge player on my draft board, and sure enough, he's the third edge player to be taken. There were 4 edge players taken after Lukas Van Ness, and if you've never watched the draft, or maybe I'm explaining something that you already understand, but when it comes to the draft, when it comes to certain positions, let's say an edge player gets picked early in the draft, the next time an edge player gets picked, they're going to teams that are like, oh shoot, we're down to the 3rd, 4th, 5th best defensive end/edge player in this draft. We better go get our guy. Typically what you would call a run of a position in the draft, right? Whenever you see a receiver taken, I guarantee you'll see a couple more taken within the next few picks, because that's just how this goes. Teams want to address needs, but they also don't want to lose out on prospects, especially when there are certain positions that aren't very deep. For example, I did not think that the safety class was very deep this year, and the Packers waited all the way until the 7th round to address it. If you look, and that's just one example, right? My point is that I do not think Lukas Van Ness would have lasted very much longer had the Packers not taken him at 13. As I've just mentioned, 4 edge players got taken in the first round alone. It's a premium position. I think the Packers wanted to make sure that they got one of their guys. And, so that's just a few reasons why the Packers went with Lukas Van Ness as opposed to a receiver, or opposed to a tight end like Dalton Kincaid, who ended up falling all the way to the Bills, who they traded up to get him. Look, the Packers were able to sit pretty and let a guy that they really liked fall to them. I will never complain about that. I next want to jump into his stats at Iowa, or I guess his college career in general. He only played for 2 years. He was a redshirt sophomore, which is he was a redshirt freshman, played 2 years at Iowa. In those 2 years, 2021, he had 33 tackles, 17 of them solo for 7 sacks. In 2022, he had 36 tackles, 18 of them solo with 6.5 sacks. So the production was there. A lot of people are probably going to point out the fact that he did not start at Iowa, which I think is a bunch of bogus. Anyone who legitimately buys into that, oh, he didn't start, and why would you pick a not start? If you did not know this, Iowa runs a seniority program, meaning that they're going to play their juniors and seniors before they play their sophomores and freshmen. As a sophomore, Lukas Van Ness was arguably the best edge player on their team, and he got more snaps than all of the other edge players, and had more production. So again, this whole Lukas Van Ness didn't start, that's a bunch of bullcrap. Do not buy into that. I'm so sick of seeing that as a knock on him. Anywhere else he would have started, I almost guarantee you that. I now want to go over Lukas Van Ness's RAS, which stands for Relative Athletic Score. And if you didn't know what that was, it's basically it's a combination of all the numbers that he put up at the combine, and then it's ranked. The total score is on a scale of 1 to 10. The higher the number, the more athletic you are, the more explosive, as so to speak. So now that I've kind of explained that, he had an RAS of 9.75. This guy is very much an athletic freak. Again, reminds me a lot of Rashawn Gary. Two very big, physical, athletic dudes who clearly have a lot of potential, but they just haven't developed that pass rushing arsenal, right? Now that Rashawn Gary's had a few years to develop, we can see that, the dividends pay off. He is a freak of nature. He is a big athletic guy. And now that he's developed his pass rushing arsenal, those things just complement each other so well. So let's go over his 40-yard dash, which was a 4.58. This dude is pretty darn quick for an edge player. His shuttle was a 4.32, and his three-cone was a 7.02. Again, this guy is pretty explosive, which is one of the biggest strengths of his game. I also want to mention the fact that he is a multi-sport athlete. He played hockey in high school, which, love hockey. That's awesome. Good for him. Love multi-sport athletes. I think that's great. I think if excuse me. One point that I see a lot of people making is that he's going to naturally be better at balance because of his experience with hockey. I think that will help him tremendously at the next level. But yes, as much as I'm raving about this prospect, because I really do like this pick, in the moment I might have been a little, I got the pick, or I understood it, but I didn't know much about him, or at least I didn't know this much about him. And now that I've had time to sit on it, I love it. I think this is a great pick. But for all the great things that I have to say, I do need to go over some of his weaknesses. Because he's so young, that is a bit of a double-edged sword. He lacks experience and definitely will be taken advantage of by more seasoned veterans in the NFL. His pass rushing arsenal, as I was kind of alluding to with Gary, is not very polished. He's big and fast, but he's not very agile, and he isn't... he has difficulty making quick turns. You can go and put on his tape, and you will find a ton of things to like, and you will find some things that you don't like so much, like the fact that he has a tendency to not stay on his feet. He's been known to hit the ground a few times. These are all things, luckily, that are not, it's not like big character issues. It's not something that you can't fix. These are all things that you can coach up, things that you can develop. I think having him in the same room as Rashawn Gary, someone who went through a very similar kind of career projection, that's amazing. I think if Gary can kind of take him in under his wing and be like, hey, man, like, let's do this. Let's just be the best pass rushing tandem in the NFL. And they figure it out. That's awesome. Like I said, this is not a pick this is not like a win now type of pick, right? If the Packers had selected Jackson Smith-Njigba, that would have been like a win now. We're going to go out and get Jordan Love a highly anticipated target, get him someone that we know is probably going to be explosive. Now, last time I'll mention his name, but Jackson Smith-Njigba did fall all the way to 20 to the Seattle Seahawks. So what does that tell you about his value? What does that tell you about how other teams view him? we'll see how the season goes. He could turn into a superstar like everyone thinks he will. He might not. I had to leave that out there because I know there are so many Packers fans who just, like, this is the one guy they wanted. And he was sitting there, and the Packers could have taken him, and they didn't. And I get that that's upsetting, disappointing maybe. But you have to understand that this is a different philosophy. Like, the Packers' draft philosophy is relatively the same, but this is a different team. It's not an Aaron Rodgers-led championship contender. This is a, hey, we're trying to figure out what we've got in Jordan Love. Not necessarily a full rebuild, but we're definitely, I don't know. I don't necessarily expect us to be contenders. I don't think many people do. So I am totally fine with picking a guy that will help, maybe not immediately, but in 2 to 3 years. I think in 2 to 3 years, we could be looking at one of the best pass rushing duos in the NFL with Rashawn Gary and Lukas Van Ness and a couple other guys that we drafted in later in this 2023 draft, which I will eventually get into with some later picks. I will say this episode, as far as the draft prospect profiles go, will probably be the longest because, again, this was our first round pick. There's a ton of things to talk about. And I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything because I think this is I think this guy's going to be a stud. I really, really do like this pick. I'm pretty excited. And I think you should be too. Is it okay to be upset, though? Or is it okay to be frustrated that the Packers did not pick a guy that you really liked? Yes, it's okay. It's okay to feel a little upset. But I want to remind you that the Packers have their own way of doing things, and I'm not going to question it until they give me a reason to. The last thing that I want to mention is that the Packers were able to get a ton of great value in this draft. The fact that this is just one pick. This is our first pick, okay? I've got 12 other guys to go through. This was a really exciting draft with a ton of value, in my opinion. I can't wait to get into the rest of these players. But lastly, I just want to build as much hype as I can for Lukas Van Ness. Go support him. He's our newest Green Bay Packer. He's our first round pick this year. We got to support him. We got to give him, we got to stand behind him and let him know that us Packers fans got his back. And we expect big things from him. Maybe not right away, but I know that this kid can be a stud. I'm so excited for the future. He is going to wear number 90 for us. That's the last thing I want to say. And then, look forward to more prospect profiles that I will be releasing later this week. I'm going to try to do it on a daily basis. So for the next 2 weeks, it looks like I'm going to be doing some prospect, looking at some films and written up on some player bios and RAS scores and all that. But I can't wait to gather all of that together and share my thoughts. Thank you so much for making Real Packers Talk a part of your daily listen. I can't thank you guys enough. Again, you can find me anywhere on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Anchor/Spotify at Real Packers Talk. Thank you all so much. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Pack Go.